Peachland Watershed Protection Alliance. On their websites as well. You can contact IWTF888@gmail.com if you'd like a link. Somebody could do that for you. As I said, it'll be half hour, 15 minutes Q&A. Please hold your questions until after the speaker has done their presentation. Use the raise hand facility to pose a question or put it in the chat. And we'll try and get to everybody as much as we can, but I'm going to be quite firm with the timeline. We have an hour and a half with a potential half-hour overrun. So it's now 7:30, so we're hoping to be done by 8:30 with possibly an overrun until 9 o'clock. I hope that works out for everyone. Taryn, maybe you could take it away from there.
Hello, everyone. Taryn Scalbania from the Peachland Watershed Protection Alliance and one of the co-founders of the IWTF. And I am very pleased to be here this evening and welcoming two remarkable women. When I first started this journey myself of forestry reform, I realized that it was, in my view, predominantly women, intelligent women, beautiful, educated, hardworking, and very generous with their time. And our ladies both represent this. Another close friend and colleague, Anthony Britniff, has called our first speaker the face of forestry reform of British Columbia. And he says, and a good-looking face at that. And that is Michelle Connolly. Michelle will be presenting first. She's very dedicated to helping the community voice. She found out early in her career through conservation movements that it is the people, the community, that have the most say. They're the ones that are going to make the changes, force the hand of government, change the legislation. We can't wait for the government to do it. We can't wait for industry to do it. Licensees certainly don't want to do it. And the environmental movement does not have that agenda. So Michelle is going to be our first speaker. She founded an organization in Prince George area called Conservation North. And it's a fantastic group. I call it the gold standard of the community organizations in forestry in BC. And you can find their website. I'll put it in the link. So please listen to Michelle Connolly. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to hit share screen and click on my talk here. Can you guys see my slides? Nods? Okay, yes, great. All right, so, and you can still see it now? Great, okay, thank you. So thank you for the introduction, Taryn. I thank you to the Interior Watershed Task Force for inviting me to speak. As Taryn said, I run a group called Conservation North. So I'm going to talk about our approach to defending primary forests in North Central BC. We came together in 2017 as a kitchen table group in Lheidli territory, where I live, Prince George. We started out with a focus on the inland temperate rainforest and on old growth. And in 2020, we broadened our area of concern to all natural or primary forests in North Central and Northern BC. The main reason for that being that everything is in trouble now in the face of the bioeconomy that can use a wider variety of species and ages of natural forest. And of course, a desperate forest sector. So when we say science informed, some of us have backgrounds in biology and ecology, which helps us interpret some of the information about forests that comes our way. But it is not a prerequisite for having a group that weighs in on forestry. We're all volunteers. So we run on donations and grants, and we're not a charity, so we don't have a CRA number. We wanted the ability to lobby and advocate as much as we wanted without any restrictions on what we can do or say. And we were concerned that having charity status would impinge upon that. So we never pursued it. We are about protecting our kin, other life forms. This is what motivates us to keep them in the world and to make sure their populations are healthy. And not just wildlife, of course, but fish, lichens, plants. We know that wildlife are experiencing unprecedented declines in BC and globally. And this is because of habitat loss. When we think about the best habitat for species that use forested ecosystems, that would be the places that have been in development for the longest time, that haven't been degraded by industrial activity, that have the greatest complexity. So these are the primary forests. We use the Convention on Biological Diversity definition of a primary forest, which is simply a forest that has never been logged and has developed following natural disturbances like beetle outbreaks, fire, diseases, pathogens, and under natural processes, regardless of its age. So when you think of BC, all our old growth is primary forest, but not all our primary forest is old. Primary forest can have recently experienced, fire, for example. Still a primary forest if it hasn't been logged. Okay, quiz. Does anyone know which one of these is a primary forest? It's kind of a trick question. All four of them, yeah. Okay, so yeah, Evelyn said all four of them. That's correct. These are all primary forests because they have never been logged. So why do we focus on primary forests again? Well, they're complex systems that we don't understand. They're the best wildlife habitat out there. They contain the adaptive capacity to contend with the climatic changes that are coming our way fast. So in that way, they have like an inherent intelligence in a sense. Humans don't know how to recreate or reassemble them once they've been disassembled. We don't even know if it's possible. So from our perspective, being precautionary means leaving all these places alone. We do public education on primary forests via public events. We advocate directly to elected officials and other decision makers in BC government. We occasionally provide informal technical support like mapping to grassroots members of First Nations, for example, but occasionally at the government level as well. First Nations governments, that is. I'm going to talk about a few things that I think have enabled us to be somewhat successful, if that's the right word. So I think a strong community group needs a clearly articulated vision. What do you want the future to look like? So for us, we want a future where the variety and abundance of BC's native species and the natural communities they comprise are healthy, secure, and valued by all. That's the statement on our website. And we have a clear demand. So we specifically want primary forests protected, full stop, no management within them. I think this is what keeps us cohesive. So we all want the same thing and we're motivated to act on it because we love nature. Without a clear vision that's articulated in a coherent way, you just have a set of dissatisfactions around methods or a laundry list of pet peeves, like don't clear cut, don't use glyphosate. Those aren't things that we demand because on their own, they will not stop the loss of primary forests. there are certain things that we don't think are as effective as we fight industrial logging in natural forests. This includes meeting with industry, being otherwise friendly with them. I think personally, I feel like this is the best way to lose your power as a citizens group, in part because then they won't be afraid of you. They will tell the BC government that they've consulted with you. They will stick handle you using the process they operate within, which is there to accommodate them. They have this down to an art. When they ask to meet with you, their purpose is to mollify, pacify, and neutralize you. And we have to behave like we have power, not them, even though, you know, we know who has the actual power in the situation. It's like a fake it till you make it type of thing. So we always approach this as if we're the ones with the power. We don't use the language of industry and forestry if we can help it, because embedded within it is the belief system that created the predicament we're in, where living ecosystems are a commodity. We don't use their own weapons to fight them because they're more skilled at using them. We need our own language that speaks to people's hearts. So much of the time we're told, don't worry about it, it's under control. This is a decision that was come to after very careful analysis. There are professionals involved, etc. This is, of course, all BS. The language of forestry is technocratic and more often than not related to economics and not the protection of nature. So for that reason, we use the language that comes more naturally to us. The effect of using the technical language of forestry is that regular people feel like it's somehow not their business to weigh in on what's happening, that they are somehow lacking critical knowledge necessary to have an informed position. I've spoken with people that feel like they don't have the right to weigh in because they're not foresters and don't understand what's going on. And I sort of think this is by design. If you feel like it's not your business to talk back and to express an opinion about what's happening, then you just won't do it. But the fact is, we absolutely have the right to weigh in on this, and we have the right to use our own language to talk about it. We don't ask for better forestry or stopping clear cutting in primary forests. This means that we do not want selective logging, partial cutting, more sustainable forestry, alternative harvesting in primary forests. We simply want forestry out of primary forests. The place forestry belongs now is in the secondary forests, the previously logged forests. I want to add that we have actually met with industry before. If we did choose to have a meeting with an industry rep, we would know what we want, we would deliver that message, and when they say, no, it's not practicable, you say the meeting's over. And we've never compromised. We did meet with Canfor once in a public park about 4 years ago. We asked for the specific timing of logging they wanted to do in a certain area. And they said, no, we're not giving you that. So we got up and left. In general, meeting with those big companies is a waste of time. On another occasion, we met with Carrier Lumber about building a road into an intact valley about a few hours east of here. And they told us that we must be against people with physical disabilities accessing nature because we were against punching a logging road into an intact valley. That's still amusing when I think about it, but when someone tries to, you know, throw that kind of garbage at you, they're just not being respectful. So again, waste of time. I want to put it out there that one thing we always keep in mind is that professional forestry, and of course, foresters are often kind of the gatekeepers for everything that's happening on public lands, Indigenous lands. is supposed to serve the public interest. So standard 6 is about forest stewardship. And it all makes you wonder if the bylaws are actually being upheld. This is a map of non-legal old growth management areas in the Prince George Forest District. These were designed and formally established by the local Ministry of Forests office here, if you'll believe it. The black outline is the Prince George Forest District, and what's in green are the new non-legal old growth management areas that came into effect in December of 2022. So these areas are the result of 5 years of making a public stink and by making a formal complaint to the Forest Practices Board in 2019. So they did an investigation in 2020 and found that the biodiversity order was out of date. So the biodiversity order is the document that sort of sets the standards around industrial logging in the Prince George TSA, in the entire TSA. Things like, this is how much, interior forest condition you need. This is how much you need to retain, etc. So when they did their investigation, they found that the biodiversity order was out of date, for one, so it wasn't adequate to protect biodiversity, and that the activities of licensees were basically pushing wildlife to the brink. So the Forest Practices Board report made a recommendation of setting aside habitat, primary forest, mostly old growth, in reserves. And as I said, that was in a letter, that was in their final report. This was about a year after meeting with licensees and nations. So many of the people they spoke with were very unhappy about this, but the district manager pushed it through. Our work now is to make these old growth management, non-legal old growth management areas permanent, because of course, protections under FERPA are sometimes temporary and violable. So a company can request to build a road through one or have it changed or moved. We were told by a sympathetic staff person at the local office that all of this was enabled by our campaigning, by making a public fuss, holding rallies, getting earned media, writing letters to the editor, etc. So it was a combination of going through a legitimate channel, the Forest Practices Board complaints process, and by being public troublemakers. So it really helps us to be able to show people what's happening on the ground. And we do this using video and photography generally, but maps can help too. So this is the Seeing Red version 2.0. So we released the first version of this map 2 years ago. And this one will get released either probably by next week. And it shows the cumulative impact of forestry and roads, among other industrial activity. It really clearly shows where the primary forests are. They're in green. And I zoomed over a different spot in BC so that you could see what our Seeing Red map shows for, this would be the Okanagan, so it's kind of centered around Penticton. So you can see the cumulative impacts in this area of roads, logging, private property, and other developments. What's in red is actually probably a bit of an underestimate of what is no longer primary forest. And that's because we can only show the data, really modern records of impacts. So it wouldn't reflect, for example, historical logging. But in general, the older the logging is, the less kind of like, less like clear cutting it was. So I guess for all intents and purposes, we consider what's green to be a pretty good reflection of what's primary forest. In general, this is kind of our approach to this whole situation. As a community group, we have the freedom to not necessarily be, quote, realistic. We don't want to settle for something better than what we have. We actually demand what nature needs. So our asks are a reflection of that. Since I've got the floor, and this is kind of a timely thing, I want to go over this really quickly. The biodiversity and ecosystem health framework, it sort of relates a bit to what we've been asking for as a group. This is really what we're all about, is protecting biodiversity and ecosystem health, provided it's defined the right way. So we have very focused feedback to this process. When the OGRO Strategic Panel released their report back in, I guess it was 2020, of course, their top line, one of their top line items was, we need a paradigm shift and we need to prioritize biodiversity and ecosystem health. When we read the report, there were some pretty big red flags for us. My background is in disturbance ecology. I have a master's from UNBC here. So I'm kind of, my ears are always up for language around forest health. We did a public presentation a few days ago where a lot of the emphasis is me talking about this, and we'll share the video this week on social media. But we were primed to be a little bit concerned about how ecosystem health was defined because of the way it was used in the OGRO Strategic Panel report. The language in there suggested that they were going to use it sort of synonymously as forest health, which, if you're concerned about primary forests, is a massive, massive red flag. So our group, Conservation North's feedback to this process, the top ask is a scientifically robust and sound definition of ecosystem health. And they say that this is going to be turning into, they say that a law might come out of this. And if that's the case, this definition needs to be in the law. Our definition is in our Take Action letter, so you can find it online. It's on our website, conservationnorth.org/takeaction. So I'm not going to repeat it here. It's because there's so much to look out for in something like this. It makes the most sense if you actually read it yourself on your own time instead of me reading it out here. But we think this should be quite stringent. Secondly, we don't want ecosystem-based management in primary forests. Better management belongs in secondary forests. So from my reading of some of the things I'm reading coming out of other groups, I guess that sets us apart a little bit, because we're not okay with any kind of industrial management or roads in primary forests whatsoever. Thirdly, we're really concerned that the forest landscape planning process is going to just involve foresters and governments. And we think it should actively involve civil society groups like ours, natural historians. It definitely has to involve traditional Indigenous knowledge. And it should probably involve ecologists if we're going to be involving professionals at all. So those are our top three asks. One thing that kind of came out of the exercise of thinking about what we wanted as a group in this provincial process, and something we haven't really promoted widely, is the idea of half Earth, which you guys might know from E.O. Wilson. So the idea is that nature needs half earth. Some people have different ways of describing it. And one way that we could implement something like that in BC is to start by setting aside all remaining primary forests under a sincere form of protection. Doesn't really matter what it's called. It just can't be FERPA, and it has to be real protection, not temporary, not moving around. And then we'd probably have to scoop some of the previously logged lands from the timber harvesting land base and allow them to recover to kind of meet that 50% target. I don't actually know what proportion of BC is still primary forest. It's really hard to do that analysis with the data. We've tried over a few years, but right now what we have is the ability to kind of eyeball it, you know, based on zooming in to a certain area. So that would be something we would need to figure out. What proportion of primary forests is there of the total, and then how much do we add to that of the previously degraded landscape in order to properly meet nature's needs and protect biodiversity. So as I said, we have a take action letter. It's new, it just went up last week, and people from anywhere can send it. So yeah, I would like to say thank you to IWTF for inviting me to speak to the group here. And I think I can probably take questions, and I guess I'll stop screen sharing.
Wow, thank you very much, Michelle. That's lots to digest there. Let's have a question from someone. John, is it? No. I actually have a question while people are thinking about this. Your organization looks incredibly organized, so I'm just wondering what resources you people have at hand to help you with the work that you're doing. You obviously have a website. You spoke about mapping, the red earth thing. That's something new for me. I don't know what that is. Can you explain that a bit?
Sure. So yeah, we're very, very lucky because we to start with, you know, we had, all of us kind of had a familiarity with what was happening. We had, you know, some of us have been involved in work in, you know, quote, natural resources for quite a few years. So for example, I knew of a guy that was pretty skilled with mapping. So we went to him to create our Seeing Red map. You know, most of us really like spending time in the bush, spending time on the land. We have a couple photographers in our core group, which really helps us because, of course, we can, you know, all the photographs that you saw in the presentation I just did were taken by them. So we're very lucky to have people that can take high quality photographs, and you know, in a culture that's just so visually based, it's quite useful. So yeah, we started out very small, right? Like we established the group in 2017, and like I said, we were a kitchen table group. So it's taken a few years to get some of the skills we needed. My personal background, I'd worked for a few environmental organizations, and I'd been volunteering since I was a teenager. So I guess I sort of picked up a few things since then, including the idea that you kind of have to be a bit of a jack of all trades when you start up a community group, or at least find people to kind of cover those things. So it's some things we were lucky enough to have just with the people we had when we started, and other things we had to learn. So that's kind of that's developed over the 6 years that we've been doing our thing.
Thank you. It's an amazing thing what you're doing. It's really wonderful. Taryn, did you have a question?
Yes, quick question. Ability and value in following your mission statement. Can other community groups all over BC either copy, mimic, or add your mission statement to theirs? And would there be value in that we have a more cohesive mission across the province? Would you care if we copied?
People can pilfer, steal, rip off, borrow our mission, our vision, anything they want. Yeah, I would love it if people did that. And yeah, I feel like that's actually maybe one of the weaknesses of maybe some of the grassroots groups, is that we all have different asks, right? And this is just what we decided was appropriate for our region. I'd be surprised if biodiversity was doing much better in other parts of BC. So perhaps this is an appropriate thing to be applying in other places. Yes, or saying out loud.
June Ross. You're muted, June. June, can you unmute your phone? There.
There it is.
There you go.
I'm down. Thank you, Karen, for having us all here. I'm wondering about private managed forest lands on the island. All of our watersheds from the Malahat up to Campbell River are private managed forest lands, which means they're owned by forest companies. So are you doing anything around private managed, or is it only under the Forest Range and Practices Act?
No, we don't really weigh in on what's happening on private forest lands, simply because we, well, there may be some in north central BC, but I guess our perspective is that there's not really much we can do about what happens in private lands. So we really do just focus on what's in the so-called crown land, public land. So that's our focus. Is yeah, I think it's quite challenging to address that. I understand that there is such a huge chunk of Vancouver Island that's private. I'm personally kind of relieved that we don't weigh in on that. I would have no idea where to even start.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for the question.
Thanks, June. Mark, did you have a question? Mark Polzer?
Yeah, I have a question. Is there a reason why you use the word disassemble regarding deforestation as compared to destroy?
Yeah, I guess you could also use the word destroy. There's a lot of talk in the air these days about doing restoration. And I don't know much about restoration, but one thing I do know is that it's not really possible to restore, an old growth forest or a primary forest after you've industrially logged it. And I suppose using the words kind of disassemble and reassemble were a little bit more, for me, just illustrate the idea of kind of attempting to restore a natural ecosystem after you've destroyed it. It sounds a bit better than like undestroy. So yeah, I guess I was just trying to sort of use a word that suggested that, it's very difficult to restore something like that that's been in development for millennia. Yeah, I guess that's what I was trying to communicate. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
Eli, you're next.
Thanks, Evelyn. Michelle, my question is about other forests. I mean, you've talked mostly about saving primary forests. And what about, I mean, for one thing, as we have more forest fires, we're going to have more fires in lands that are primary or secondary. Mm-hmm. And those, from what I understand, forests that have been burned still have a lot of value. They're not, worthless. They still maintain a lot of integrity. They're not burned lands are not uniformly burned. There's still a lot of intact forest in amongst the burned areas, and the soil is not necessarily all destroyed. Some of it is, but a lot of it isn't. And I'm just concerned, especially in a time when we're seeing more fires, that it's going to be another excuse to do more logging. So is that an issue that your group has looked at or is talking about?
Yes, this happens to be my very favorite topic. The idea of like just the eagerness with which industrial forestry goes after naturally disturbed landscapes. So yeah, I would suggest watching. So we're going to post on our social media the recording of a talk that I gave on last Friday, about this very topic. This is the problem of forest health. It's coming from both directions, right? So we're hearing now from industry and government, language around like, well, we have to get in there and manage so that there is no fire. And then of course, after a fire happens, it's like, well, we better get in there and go get the trees or else it's a big waste and we need to replant it. Yes, this is a very intense problem. And this is actually one of the main reasons we switched from just advocating for the oldest forests to advocating for all forests. So our priority is naturalness. It's not age. In theory, you can clear cut a piece of, old growth wet spruce forest and then wait 250 years and have a regenerated old growth forest. But it might be missing a lot of the major structures that take way longer than that to accumulate, the coarse-woody debris, the snags. So it takes a lot longer than just like the age of the trees to get back the features of those forests. And that's why we realized that just focusing on like age is actually a problem. We need to set aside big areas that are just not to be touched, and we let natural processes proceed in those areas, including fire, including insect outbreaks, all of that. So yeah, we are definitely seeing that, and that, like, when I think about what the next 20 years of my life is going to look like, it's probably going to be teaching people about the value of forests that have had a natural disturbance like fire and insects, because like you said, they are very important to keep around. Natural forests that go through those things are very important to keep standing.
Thank you, Michelle. We've got time for 2 more questions. Make that 3 if it'll be fast here.
Okay,
Jackie Larson, Larkin, you go ahead.
Oh, Evelyn, can I just say we've had questions in the chat box.
I see them there. That's why I'm
yeah.
saying, yeah.
So
Go ahead,
Sarah
Jackie.
Newton's and Matt C's.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, I can take those. Yeah, so Sarah, our interactions with Indigenous nations. So what we've found is that the key is putting our message out there. We care about nature, we care about natural ecosystems and natural communities. And often grassroots members of First Nations come and approach us, and we work with them. So that's normally what happens, is we hear from community members that are worried about an area that might need a bit of technical assistance from us, like a bit of mapping, or rides out into the field, that kind of thing. So our policy is that we speak with any community members that talk to us, and we try to support them if their interests are in conserving part of nature.
Do you want to do the second one that's down there as well?
Yeah.
Support.
Yes. So how much participation or support has Conservation North gotten from industry professionals? Any tip for walking the line between professional commitments and being a troublemaker? So yeah, we do. We actually have kind of anonymous core group members that work in industry, which is very useful. And these are people that, want a job and an income, and but also want to contribute to protecting nature. So that is very, very useful for us. And tips for walking the line between professional commitments. I mean, I guess knowing the boundaries of your workplace. And I guess the secret is you want to keep your job, because you can't be an effective activist if you can't feed yourself. That's yeah, that's where I would go with that. Yeah, are there any other? I think that's it.
Okay, I'll come, there's one more there, but Jackie, I'd like you to ask your question, please.
Yeah, okay, thanks a lot. I want to say that I'm impressed and excited by the the pinpointed nature of your radical vision. And I understand why that's important for you in terms of holding your group together. But I wanted to say a little bit more about relations with Indigenous communities, because you're talking about Crown land, which is really another word for unceded Indigenous land. And so your vision would be, it to be realized is not just about local relationship building. It would be fighting to get the provincial government to actually designate all primary forests as untouchable and left alone. And my question is, what would you then say about the right of Indigenous people to make decisions in relation to that? And I don't know what's happened, but we just lost Zoom.
No,
yeah.
somebody's screen sharing there.
It's
was it
Dora
Dora?
Stewart, has by accidentally, if somebody can get a hold of Dora, I'll phone her.
Michelle, can you continue with the
Anyway,
answer to the
Michelle, is
question?
my question clear enough?
Yeah, thank you. It's very clear. Yeah, so we work with some First Nations governments as well. We work with the Simk First Nation to try and protect the Rosh Valley. We're working with the Clately, with a counselor with the Clately about the Walker. So I hear you. These are unceded lands. We, however, are a group that focuses on native biodiversity, and we believe that we have the right to speak up for the voiceless, our kin, like I said. So we will comment on what's happening to biodiversity regardless of who's affecting it. So we really see that as our role about speaking up for nature and primary forests. And of course, the end decisions come down to First Nations and of course the BC government. But for us, that's not a reason to not point out why protecting primary forests is critical to the long-term health of biodiversity.
Thanks.
Sarah Newton, did you have a question? Because I saw your hand up.
I asked it and it was answered. Thank you.
Oh, okay, fantastic.
Hello.
Okay, I've lost the chat. There was one question in the chat. Oh, here it is. Where was that now? Just scrolling up. Oh. Corporate capture dominates political structures, labor, communities, and social media. How can this be dealt with? This is from Douglas Gook. Just before you answer that question, Michelle, whoever is sharing their screen, maybe what you should do is just log out of the meeting and come back in. It doesn't appear that you...
I have phoned her, I have asked her that, but Clarice, can't you also get rid of it?
Who goes hello? Yes.
Dora Stewart, yeah. Can you just, maybe you could just quit the meeting, just leave the meeting in the bottom right-hand corner.
Stop the share.
Yeah, stop. That's
There you
it.
go. Perfect. There you go.
Okay.
Sorry about that. Michelle, just one last question. What was it there? This is
Oh, I mean, I can speak to, there was a comment by someone named Ramona Faust about how many areas of the southern half of the province are trying desperately to gain better forest management areas that are not primary forests, and pushing forest harvesting to those watersheds is concerning. Yeah, I understand. So we, we're speaking about priorities in our region, and we've determined that, the clearest way to communicate how we can do better by nature is to protect primary forests. So that's not going to be the same everywhere. And of course, like, we don't comment on better forest management at all. We just don't recommend, we don't talk about how to do logging better in secondary forests. For us, that is the domain of professional foresters. And what's appropriate in our region is not necessarily appropriate in others. So I understand so many parts of BC have been just utterly converted. And so it's a different situation on the parts of BC. I understand that. So yeah, thank you.
okay, Michelle, that's great. It's interesting, your focus. Not talking about how we should do better logging, but how we should just not log certain areas. I think it's an interesting angle that we at IWTF have not really gone into, perhaps because so much of our area is so desperately logged, and we want them to stop doing that. Taryn, can you introduce Jennifer Houghton, please? our next speaker.
Hi, everyone. I just also wanted to mention briefly, I'm on the unceded Syilx territory. And what is behind me is the bathtub of my treated peachland drinking water prior to a water treatment plant. So it's confusing, I know, to think that we're eating, drinking, and bathing in that, but that's the story of that picture. So Jennifer Houghton is a friend of mine, and I met her in her meteoric rise to forestry reform. Sadly, Jennifer moved to Grand Forks to settle and live in BC and have a wonderful life with her family, pets, and bought a home. And in 3 out of 4 years, that home flooded with 3 or 4 feet of water. And she ended up having to have what they euphemistically call managed retreat, where they expropriate your land and kick you out of your home. And it happened to about 40 homes in Grand Forks. So this sent Jennifer on a quest to see why did this happen? And it sent her into forestry practices of British Columbia very, very quickly. And she has learned more than most foresters, definitely more than the Minister of Forests, whose daddy just happened to work in forestry. She has shown that she's a natural advocate, activist, campaigner, organizer. She's very skilled at all these things. And Jennifer's presentation is going to be very exciting. And I do want to introduce now Jennifer Houghton of the Boundary Forest Watershed Society. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Taryn. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, I just want to talk a little bit about our group before I start the official presentation. So yeah, we formed after the 2018 flood, and it's a diverse group of people. Some of us are old time loggers. Not when I say us, I'm not an old time logger, but some of our loggers are on the call today. And I'm going to talk about my hero, Stan, later on. And we also have someone who used to work for the Ministry of Forests. We have people with ecology and permaculture backgrounds. We have a woodworker. And we came together because we all had the same concerns about our watershed. So our mission is to advocate for ecologically, economically, and socially sustainable forestry practices in the Kettle River watershed. All right, so I'm going to start sharing my screen, and I'm going to talk about our project. We've got a big campaign going on, and a lot of our project is in alignment with the stuff that Michelle advocates for. And also I want to say that I know part of this presentation I'm preaching to the choir. A lot of this is just meant to put the campaign into context. Okay, so our working title for this campaign is The Power of Trees, Safeguarding Communities by Saving Forests. So people across BC are making local efforts to address the negative impacts of industrial forestry in their communities, but the BC government is not taking action to protect the people being affected. Why is the provincial government ignoring people in these communities? Let's take a journey through these impacts and our solution for protecting our communities. Can you see my screen okay?
Yes, it's great.
Okay. Decades of overcutting from industrial forestry have resulted in enormous losses of primary natural forests. And because primary forests play such an important role in managing our water forests, these losses have led to numerous problems, including decreases in drinking and agricultural water supply and quality, more drought, more fires, more landslides, devastating ecosystem collapse, and more floods. Scientists are raising the alarm about how industrial forestry is making major contributions to these problems. So this is me in my house in Grand Forks in 2018 after that huge flood. It was 400 homes businesses, farms, and ranches that were hit. And in the days after the flood, like Taryn mentioned, I looked around, I saw the shock and devastation on the faces of my friends and neighbors, and I thought, I have to find out why this happened. So some old time loggers gave me a tour of our 8,000 square kilometer watershed. That's it there. We're at the bottom. It's a sparsely populated zone. The whole area only has a population of about 12,000 people. And these loggers, they showed me what's happening on the ground. We took a deep dive into the mountains up there, and it was ugly. Shocking. I also traveled the province. Oh yeah, here's our watershed. I also traveled the province and talked to scientists, people like ecologists and biologists, and also hydrologists, people who study how water and landscape are related to each other. And one of the things I discovered is that industrial logging is causing serious problems, not only in our watershed, but across the province. And anyone who's flown over the province has seen it, these bare patches where primary forests used to be. This is the northern part of our watershed. So in their desire to take large volumes of fiber off the land, big forest companies are clear cutting extremely large areas as quickly as they can. Whoops. And they're also logging in ecologically sensitive areas like beside streams and lakes, and relogging stands before they're mature. So this animated map of our watershed, the Kettle River watershed, which is mostly mountains on public land, shows the clear-cut logging that's been done there between 1965 and 2020. Every one of those yellow, orange, or red blobs is a clear cut. And you don't have to be a scientist to understand that if you take that many trees off the mountains, there's going to be flooding. If you do want to see the science, we wrote a 170-page report on our watershed, and it can be accessed on our website at boundaryforest.org. I'll say that again later. It's boundaryforest.org. There are thousands of examples in BC of the devastation left by industrial clear cutting. And here's just a few examples of how it's having an impact on our daily lives. Taryn's famous bathtub attests to this. The community of Peachland had to spend millions of dollars on a new water treatment plant because of the sediment in their drinking water. That sediment flows down the hills into their water supply because of soil damage and erosion from forestry activities. And then, of course, there's the town of Lytton, which was destroyed by a devastating fire. Overall, the number of fires in rural areas in BC has been on the increase, but not only from climate change, like the government is pointing at climate change as the problem, the cause of everything, but it's from the loss of primary forests that manage our water for us. Farmers and ranchers are being hit hard by drought, and it's costing millions of dollars. Here's another thing that I discovered in my travels. There are over 100 grassroots groups who, along with numerous Indigenous groups, are working to address the negative impacts of forestry in their communities. Many of them, not all, but many are based in the interior, in small towns and rural communities, areas that are hundreds of miles away from the decision makers in Victoria. And most of all, they're people who've been directly impacted by industrial forestry. These are people who are well educated on the effects of forest management. I know some of you are here today. They understand how ecosystems work, and they know the wildlife in their regions because they spend a lot of time in the forests. And besides these groups, there's also thousands of other individuals who have the same concerns. Here's another thing I discovered along the way. We can do logging differently. This is Stan Swinarchuk. He's a member of our group, and he's been logging, fishing, and hunting in our watershed for over 50 years. He's done logging the industrial way, and over the decades, he's seen dramatic decreases in the wildlife in our region. He knows that animals have lost their habitat and food because of clear cutting. Stan has also done logging in ways that respect nature's needs and don't cause the problems that clear cutting does. Here he is in our watershed with our other logger, Wayne Tiblus, checking out an old growth tree. It's this kind of logging that Stan is fighting for now. This other kind of logging is rooted in nature-based planning, and it doesn't prioritize fiber extraction. With nature-based planning, some logging can still be done, but the first decision is which trees to leave, and then we're left with which trees can be logged. And like Michelle was saying, one of the priorities is not to log primary forests. Just leave them the F alone. The top priority in nature-based planning is to protect ecological integrity. And some of the things that that means is the forest keeps some of its original pieces. It has high levels of native species. Here's Stan holding up some needles from white bark pine in our area. It means when we use nature-based planning, it means we keep a high degree of diversity. We keep a composition and structure that allow ecological processes to continue. So like slow snow melt in the spring and the development of old growth. It allows things to happen on nature's timelines instead of industrial deadlines. Intact forests, primary forests, are also our best protection against climate change, and the more they're left on the landscape, the safer our communities are. So our organization was excited to try and get nature-based planning into our watershed. But like others who want this in their local forest, we found out you can't do this in BC on public land. Well, why not? Well, this question goes hand in hand with this long question. With all of the knowledge about how to do logging differently, and all of the scientists speaking up about conserving forests and the importance of old growth, and Indigenous knowledge about reciprocal relationships with nature, with so many people working to save forests and protect their communities, why is BC still losing primary forests at a rapid rate? Well, there's a powerful forestry lobby in BC. Back in 2003, they influenced government to have forestry legislation changed to favor them. So provincial legislation mandates that decisions about logging on public lands are made by timber companies and based on profit considerations. The people who are out on the land making decisions about where and how much to log are trained to extract fiber as quickly as possible for the lowest cost. And other values like biodiversity, water supply, community safety, and wildlife are rarely taken into consideration. So here's another thing that we're up against: public misconception. And a lot of that stems from the forestry lobby. For example, many people believe that tree plantations offer the same benefits as natural forests, but they don't. Tree plantations are monocrops that don't function the same way as biodiverse natural forests, and they don't offer the same protection against fires, floods, or drought, and are likely to cause more of those problems. Another misconception is that forestry is a big part of the BC economy, and without it, the economy will suffer. And the truth is that while forestry used to make a significant contribution, it no longer does. As of 2019, forestry only made up less than 3% of the BC GDP, and industry was only supplying 1.9% of the jobs. Okay, so what do we do? Well, grassroots groups that are led by volunteers don't have the resources or influence of the forestry lobby. And people are telling me that they're meeting with government staff to ask for changes, to ask to change how the land around them is treated, and nothing is done. Government staffers just don't have the authority to alter the practices that are propped up by legislation. And as a result, life-giving forests continue to disappear, and people are telling me they're getting despondent. All right, so instead of making changes on the land, the government is doing things like the old growth panel review, but it hasn't implemented its recommendations. It's also creating a biodiversity and ecosystem health framework, which Michelle mentioned, which is a document which uses all the right language like ecological integrity, but it has no power to change anything on the ground. It's just a toothless paper tiger. The province of BC has yet to create enforceable policy or legislation that's making a change on the ground. There's simply no political will to do this. And nothing changes until the legislation changes. So this presents us with a clear case for re-educating decision makers and for driving the political will to change legislation. So here's our plan for getting this urgent and transformational work done. It's time to activate our network of individuals and grassroots groups that know what's going on. The aim of this game-changing citizens campaign to change forestry legislation is to unify and to send a clear single message to our politicians. What is that message? Create a new forest act to save our forests and protect our communities. Now, a forest act is a complex document. And at this point, we're going to avoid getting bogged down by trying to write out all the details. Details are important, but that comes later. We can't afford any more stalling. For now, we need to get support for this tremendous shift by keeping the message focused and clear by talking about the 3 key priorities of the new Forest Act. The first and overarching priority is to enshrine in law that all forestry decisions are based on ecosystem and conservation science rather than timber supply considerations. This is an umbrella priority that applies to everything else that comes after it. The second priority is a recentering of forestry decision-making that allows the public, including Indigenous groups, to participate. The third is that the government eliminates monopolies and instead incentivizes and supports small to medium-sized businesses doing local forestry, conservation, and restoration work. What is restoration work? Well, hopefully some ecologists can figure out how we work on that in secondary forests. All right, so this is an act in law, so it will have enforceability. And it's important that the monitoring and compliance activities are done by government instead of letting industry continue to govern itself. All right, so how are we going to make this meaningful work happen? Well, there's 4 action steps to this campaign. The first step is the preparation, which ensures that we move forward with purpose and a plan. We do research around the forestry legislation, the science, and how to shift political will. We'll also do outreach to communities and Indigenous people that need this help the most. From this, we'll build information kits and presentations. Now, here's the meat and potatoes of this campaign. We'll activate the community by holding regional events. We'll take this right to the people where they live and are feeling the impacts. So we'll invite and involve local and Indigenous groups to collaborate on organizing and hosting the event in their region. And at each event, we hold presentations to rally and motivate people. The first is by a local leader who's knowledgeable on the challenges of their region. The next is a scientific presentation emphasizing regional impacts of industrial forestry. And the next is a presentation by our team talking about what the Forest Act entails and how to talk to politicians about it. And then at those events, we'll share the information kits, which contain facts and information to present to politicians. I was told by a politician, give us the facts and information to help convince us. Step 3, to raise public awareness about the urgency and value of this campaign and to garner wider support, the events will be filmed and shared across social media, and the government. Step 4, we create reports for funders, government, and the public so the impacts and outcomes of this transformational campaign continue to build momentum. Now, step 5 isn't officially part of this campaign, but it's something that we have to think about as we go along. Who is the politician who will commit to their community by helping to draft the act and propose it in the legislature? So this campaign has a unique value. Grassroots groups have an unwavering commitment to the communities they serve, and we're leveraging this network to influence decision makers. We're joining forces to create a louder voice. So our group, to bring this important movement about, we're going to fundraise in a variety of ways. We'll do crowdfunding, we'll apply to foundations, we'll look for grants, and look to individuals. There are a lot of people who care about this issue and can't get directly involved because they have full-time jobs and families, but they want to help make this transformational work happen. We also plan on collaborating with other groups and welcoming sponsorships. We're looking to partner with people, organizations, and businesses that value our forests and are part of our communities. We've done a detailed budget, and we're seeking $218,000 to lead this vital campaign so that people unite to drive politicians to create a new Forest Act so that BC forests and communities are protected. You can't see the whole picture here. These little fierce guys, their sign says, "We love forests." All right, we've got donations set up on our website at boundaryforest.org/donate. And there's a QR code on the screen. You can take a picture of that and that'll take you straight to our website, I hope. QR codes are like beyond my capability. I think that's the way it works. We especially love e-transfers because then we don't have to pay the PayPal fees. And our email is boundaryforest@gmail.com. All right. Thank you for listening. And if you're here, you're probably already making a contribution to making this a better world. We'd love to hear your questions and your impressions. And we'd also love for you to join us.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. That was encouraging, enlivening. Wonderful. Does anybody have any questions? Yes, go ahead, Taryn. You're muted, yeah.
Jennifer, do you and the volunteers at the Boundary Forest Watershed Alliance still need directors for your board? Are you still looking for directors? Because this would be a good group to lobby.
Oh, yeah. We have a fantastic group of people on our board. At the same time, we could use some people with different skills, lots of different kinds of skill sets that we need. Fresh energy would be great. You know what would be great would be students. That would be fantastic, or people of any age, really, just to bring us fresh energy, new skill sets. I have a wish list of things that we need. If anybody's curious, you can email us at boundaryforest@gmail.com and I'll send you our wish list. We would love not only board members, but also members. So our memberships are $20 a year. Right now on our website, I don't think we have our membership application form, but I'm going to put that up there tomorrow. So you can join us even if you don't want to become a board member. And if you join us, we could always use help in whatever skill set you have to offer.
I have a question.
Go ahead, Clarice.
Hey, Jennifer, what is the $218,000 for? Like, what is that going to cover the money that you've come up that you're suggesting you need?
Yeah, so I'm glad you asked that. Anybody who's interested in investing, as what you feel is a substantial amount of money, we'll absolutely send you the detailed budgets, but I'll summarize it. So it's going to cover obviously travel and accommodation for a member of our team. It's going to cover giving a payment to the scientific speakers at each event, and as well as their travel. It's going to cover the cost for renting facilities, providing a stipend to the groups that are helping us. It'll pay, we don't have employees, we don't have staff, but it'll pay a contractor to manage this, to be the project manager. It'll pay for an admin assistant. It also includes money for advisors on contracts. So we might pay, for example, someone to help us with the legislation, doing the research on the legislation. We might pay an advisor to help us with government relations. So that sums it up. Does that I'm stuttering.
It's okay. There's a lot of different people that have to get involved in those local community meetings you're talking about. There's a fair bit of behind the scenes work that has to get that so it actually happens, right?
Yeah.
A lot of people at each of those meetings to get the word out, right?
Absolutely. like I said, the meat and potatoes of this is getting groups involved, and there's preparation work to do in order to make that happen. And we're looking at a few months of preparation work. The whole project, we're aiming for 12 to 14 months for this entire project. So a few months ahead of time to get everything pulled together, and then a few months of town to town traveling, and then a few months of follow up afterwards.
Right. Thank you.
Anthony down in the corner there, yeah. You're unmute your microphone. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, good evening and hello, Jennifer, and good to see you again. I have an observation to make, and that is that one, you're quite right to say nothing will change without changing legislation. You're absolutely bang on. But one of the most important acts that came out in one of the big changes that we saw in legislation, which was 1976, which saw what was then the new Forest Act, Forest and Range Act at that time, was also the Ministry of Forest and Range Act. I don't know if that one's escaped you, but in that act, which is still in effect today, the government lays out the purpose and priorities of the Forest Ministry. And that is the overarching one under which the other acts are subordinate, so to speak. So maybe you've looked at that, but if you haven't, take a good look at that one. And you know, history supports you in terms of nothing changes without a change in legislation. I mean, you just have to go back to 1976, which was one of the biggest organizational and structural changes, both in forestry and organization for the Ministry of Forests. And that was brought in just like that. Every act was changed, in fact. Then, you know, the ministry tried different things like the 1990-91 old growth strategy. Why did that fail? Because it wasn't supported by legislation at all. The 1993 protected areas strategy. Why did that fail? Because it wasn't supported by legislation and ended up with 50% of the areas being protected above in the Alpine. Again, we look at the deferral process. That, you know, I'm sorry to say, will fail. In fact, is failing, as I read the news, because it's not supported in legislation. And one could go on and on with legislation. So I encourage you to keep going on this one, because this is the way things will change. It's the only way.
Thank you so much, Anthony, for that comment. I need to talk to you. I need to, even before we officially launch the project, some research is in order around legislation. And, you know, for brevity's sake, for clear messaging's sake, I'm using the term Forest Act. Is that necessarily the legislation that's required? That's what the research and the advisors are required for here.
Yeah, well, that's probably good, but I think you do need to say that encompasses all the forestry acts. That expression, yeah.
Oh, okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks for that. Definitely need to chat with you.
Oh, well, that'll be a pleasure anytime.
There was a question there, Evelyn, from Casey.
Yeah, I'm just scrolling through it. Casey, are you still online? Maybe you
Oh,
could.
he has it on the chat box.
Yes, I just asked if you were going to be using accounting practices to collect and disperse the funds.
Can you tell me, is accounting practices like an official term? What do you mean by that?
Not really. I mean, are you going to track where the money comes from and where it goes? And are you going to be able to show that if anybody asks down the road?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are a registered nonprofit society. We have a treasurer. In 2020, we had a grant from Patagonia for $20,000 US. And of course, we had to track that using similar methods. And we also fundraised about $5,000 in addition to that 20. So we do have processes in place for doing that kind of accounting. And we have discussed how this is a more complex project and how the accounting is going to work. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does.
Yeah. So we are required, obviously, because we're a registered nonprofit, we do have to track these things, spreadsheets, budgeting, and make it all publicly available and transparent.
I think I would suggest that that comes out in your message.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the floor? Actually, I have a question. We live in a community called Lumbee, which is east of Vernon. And actually, a lot of our forestry companies, it's funny, when you come into Lumbee, there's a big sign there that says that the community that forestry made, and somebody added onto the bottom and said forestry and agriculture made. But at one time, Lumbee had 7 sawmills. It doesn't have any anymore. What's happening in our community is most of the logging work is basically people running feller bunches and logging trucks. The upper Kettle River is our community. That's where we're logging up there right now. My question to you is, what do you say to your community members who are so invested in logging? Because that's a real pushback that we're getting, and a lot of our membership, the Silver Hills Watershed Watch people, don't actually want to be vocal about this. You're talking about making presentations to communities.
Yeah.
And the reason is because they're being vocal about our neighbors' jobs and livelihoods. It's a confusing problem that we're having.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why like members of our group are retired loggers, and there's also someone who used to work for the Ministry of Forests. And we, in our report that we wrote for our watershed, we spent a lot of time talking about job creation through different kinds of logging. And that's one of the reasons in the top 3 priorities, we included incentivizing and supporting small to medium-sized forestry businesses. I think that has to be part and parcel of this transition. Community members have to be supported in some way. It can't just be like cancel all logging for everybody right now, because there's just going to be so much pushback. It's going to be impossible to put this through. And so we have to find a way to talk about this so that it sounds realistic, so that it is realistic. And it's not some woo-woo kind of imaginary, oh, everyone will suddenly have jobs in restoration and conservation. We have to be clear and solid about where the jobs are going to come from, and how the legislation and the policies that come from government are going to help make transitions happen.
Yeah, one of the approaches we're using, and we actually have different statistics than you have, but I think there's 2,800 forestry-based jobs in the Thompson Okanagan region of the more than 300,000 jobs there are in our region. So it is an interesting perception that forestry is a big employer. Eli, you've got your hand up. Do you have a question?
Yes, I do. And actually, I've just got 3 comments I wanted to make, Jennifer. The first was that even if legislation is changed, it's not going to change much unless there is a lot of people on the ground to to ensure compliance. And so that's, that, I mean, this professional reliance idea that the Liberals brought in didn't make sense, and was just, an idea which was basically giving free rein to the forestry companies. So that's got to be part of the legislation, that we have an important number of people. Second, people on the ground and that know what they're doing, and that can, and attitudes have to change. This legislation also has to change attitudes, because without that, there's a lot of cynicism in forestry about the kinds of changes that we're talking about. The other thing I just wanted to mention was that I have spoken with, over the last couple of years, with 6 different MLAs in the province, and the 2 that I got actually one of them was Green Party, Adam Olsen, but 2 of the Liberal MLAs, now BC United MLAs, were very were very aware of the problems. One was Lauren Dirksen in Williams Lake, and the other one was Mike Morris in Prince George, and especially Mike Morris. What I wanted to say is, there are undoubtedly, as well as them, a number of other MLAs that are concerned about the same thing that we are talking about, that you're talking about. And I think they would be great allies. The other thing I just wanted to mention, that in terms of this, you're talking about, you don't want to make this woo-woo, the whole project. And yet, I think we all know that large-scale clear cutting really doesn't make any sense. It's just a way of making rapid profits, and it's destroying the land. And that also has to be part of what we're talking about, is downsizing machinery, which gives, it's going to create more jobs. And we do have to talk. That's kind of the elephant in the room, as far as I'm concerned, is large scale clear cutting. So that's all I wanted to say. Just wanted to.
Thank you, Eli.
Thank you. Thank you for the feedback. And Eveline, too, thank you for that about the jobs. Thank you both.
Sarah Newton, did you have a question?
Yeah, and I was just gonna thank you both. And Jennifer, I just was curious, how is, maybe it's cumulative impact is gonna be the solution, but I'm working at a Revelstoke, and we've done a lot of the same kind of stuff: education, lobbying, on the ground blockades, highway blockades, and that was after decades of government and industry meetings, and they just, like Michelle said, they don't go anywhere. And I feel like the only thing is, on top of all the education, is massive province-wide protests, and they've tapered out, and I think we need to get those back into the game. And I also wanted to say that when we do a lot of our education, we, in the same breath of save old growth or primary forest or habitat conservation, we're saying a just transition for industry workers, because this pitting of one group against the other is what everybody wants. So we just spend a lot of time educating people on how we are all the losers, some sooner than others. But just that we're going to run out of forest at some point. We might as well stop now while there's a little left. And we did a lot of work on the just transition for industry. And I also feel like we have no species at risk act in BC, and that's a very tangible thing that needs to be brought up over again and over again. People don't realize we have no species at risk act. If we had that, we'd be protecting more land. And I think it'd be really great when we're pushing for stuff. Suzanne Smart's course at UBC, I found out, is an elective. So I feel like foresters really must be in the dark about a lot of the stuff we're talking about. And that's something I'd like to see. And yeah, so thanks. And I hope it's a cumulative impact of, we're just going to keep educating and working together. Thanks.
Thank you, Sarah. And I think some of the comments are bringing home the point that the events in each region have to be tailored to the region. we have a common message, but each region has different impacts and different emphasis.
Different histories of what's happened already.
Yeah.
I think we're hearing that. June Ross on Vancouver Island.
Yeah, hi Jennifer, and thank you so much, and nice to see you again. I was on a Sierra Club webinar. This probably goes back about 4 years ago, and I think this is something for us to get out to the public as well. Biodiversity. They had a biologist on, and they had taken a team of people out into a first growth forest, and they went up to the top of the trees and they collected some 800,000 specimens. Out of that 800,000, I think the figure was about 160,000 of those specimens had never been seen before. So, you know, I think when we start to hit the public, we have to talk those kinds of issues as well. Anyway, that I just want to pass that along because it really hit me hard between the eyes, as a matter of fact. The other thing is Merv Wilkinson here on the island, when he was alive, he had a big piece of land, and he sustainably forested that land, and it's totally an amazing piece of property. So that's the other thing I think people need to stop and think about, is how do we sustainably forest, right? And he's a prime example. I think you could go to that group and find out how he did it.
That's a great example, and people need to know that there are examples. And Harriet Proctor Community Forest is another example of people who are doing it right.
Yeah.
Thank you, June. Just a quick comment. I represented the professional agrologists during the Professional Reliance Action period back in the early 2000s. And this speaks to something that Michelle said earlier about foresters. There was a bylaw number 2 says that they had to honor the public trust. The public trust was a big conversation that we had. Biologists and agrologists felt that we needed to save the guppies, and the foresters and the engineers figured we needed to save the jobs. I think that sort of speaks to where foresters are coming from, and it's something that we should all keep in mind. It's not that they're not being educated, it's just that they have a different focus of what the public trust is. Are there anybody else have a few comments or another question?
France had his hand up.
Go ahead. France's iPhone there. Is it Tony?
It's Tony, yeah.
Yeah, Tony.
You're muted. Yeah.
You're muted, Tony.
While he's trying to figure that out, he's with our group.
Yes, actually, Stan would like to speak. Stan's only using his hand, and I couldn't even find my little icon hand. So,
okay, so you're asking for Stan to speak. Stan, you need to unmute yourself.
That's correct. Yeah.
I don't see Stan anymore. Where are you, Stan? I've lost you.
There we go.
Oh.
Can you hear me?
We
Yep.
can.
Yes.
Go ahead.
You can hear me?
I can hear you. I can see you too.
Okay. Hi, Jennifer. Speaking about jobs, I've been thinking on this for quite a while, and the jobs that we will lose by not logging, there'll be 5 more jobs on the same situation. So as I been going around in the Kettle River watershed, I see that there's a lot of old culverts and a lot of old wooden ones. And a lot of them not maintained. And that's why we get so much silt and gravel in our rivers in the springtime. And that's not a machine job, that's a man job, eh? And you would be, we have 56,000 culverts in the Kettle River watershed. And nobody's looking after it. So basically, we stop logging and let's go into the forest and fix everything up and put the water where it was before, instead of every 100 meters on a logging road. So yeah.
Excellent. Yeah, excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Stan. Yeah, there's some jobs for you.
Yeah. Lots of jobs.
There's a question there from KL Coach. He asked it to Michelle, but it's relevant to Jennifer, and I just posted it on the chat box. Do you see your group being able to access the $1 billion fund announced by the government? I'm not sure what that is. Does anyone, maybe KL Code, you can describe what that is? Who she is.
Oh, yeah, it's the watershed security strategy put out by the new Walrus Ministry. It's
it's the $1 billion that's being offered by government to Indigenous nonprofits, tenure holders, a whole variety. It's $1 billion, so it's a fairly significant amount of money. So I really just have no understanding of how this is going to be allocated. So it'd be interesting to know exactly how nonprofits can benefit from this.
Right.
What was it called again?
Oh, I can't remember the exact name of it, but I can find that for you.
Okay, yeah, that would be great.
Okay, thank you.
I don't know if we want to take government money, but we'll see.
Well, can somebody see if they can look that up? Because it'd be interesting to know for what that is. The Watershed Restoration Fund, I think, has just been up to $100 million. We met with our MLA a couple of weeks ago, and I think that's what she said, and it had just been increased too. So this is obviously different money for different purpose. June, can you ask your question, please?
Yeah, Jennifer, I just want to let you know as well, Yubo, which is a small town where there used to be a mill on Vancouver Island, they had gone to the Environmental Law Clinic over the Forestry Acts and asked them to do an analysis. And what they have found is that, and I can sure send you the document that I got from Yubo, that due diligence has not been done by the forest companies. So that's another issue that we sure should be pushing on, I think, as well.
Yeah, please send that to me. Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, I just read in the paper in Vernon that the Forest Practices Board is doing an audit of Tolko, and Tolko is one of our major licensees. So I'm hoping that they'll show up some of this stuff. Something that's interesting about Forest Practices Board information is that if they do find someone at fault, someone who is aggrieved in the terminology of the FPB, those people are allowed to respond, and often the reports are adjusted in accordance with those responses. And unfortunately, the public doesn't have access to those. It's just something you should be aware of when an FPB report comes out. Mike Anderson, I think you had your hand up at one point. Did you have something that you wanted to offer or ask a question about?
Yeah, a couple of things. I am a forester. I know a lot of foresters that aren't necessarily about the bottom line. And foresters is not so much maintaining jobs that they're really worried about. It was maintaining those mill jobs, because the way we do forestry right now is not making jobs. it's making, you know, we're buying bigger equipment all the time, so we're reducing jobs really. That's one of the biggest dangers in forestry as far as lack of jobs goes, is all the mechanization that we've been allowed to happen.
Yeah.
So, but I also want to say, you know, there's foresters that realize this, and a heck of a lot of them are working with First Nations right now because First Nations realizes this too. And I hear you guys complain about the same kind of things as I sit in boardrooms with a number of First Nations complaining about directly with government. So somewhere along the line here, it's not, you know, and I guess it's not just about where we harvest, it's how we harvest. Harvesting doesn't mean you got to clear cut it. I've been harvesting timber for 50 years. You know, the only clear cutting I did in the last 2 years, even with reserves, that is, and it was because my woodlot got totally burned out by fire. And all I've been clear cutting is totally black trees. You know, so it's about how you harvest, not just where you harvest, and that never enters the dialogue. The dialogue is all about should we cut that watershed or not how do we cut that watershed and how do we get the resources out of it, because you know we all need wood, whether we like it or not. We all utilize wood. I see some wood in the background on some of your people here. I know darn well, you know, I live in a wooden house, and most of us do. So how do we go about getting that wood and still maintaining all those other values in the forest? How do we do proper forestry, not just fiber management? And that is one thing about a lot of foresters are trained to do fiber management rather than proper forestry. But I think we've got to think about those things. And I look at this group, I've got the same darn issues as you have. But if you really want to get somewhere, start taking a look at it. We've got the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People Act now, which says that, you know, they have to manage in conjunction with First Nations. Essentially, they have to get free, prior, and informed consent. And I know from working with First Nations for more than 25 years that they're pretty cognizant of a lot of the issues you're talking about, a lot of the issues here at this table. You know, water is more important than trees in a lot of ways. You know, the understory is just as important as the trees. The biodiversity is a more important factor than fiber. You know, those kinds of things. First Nations understand that, and it might take a while for them to come around because they've been under the influence of industry to some extent, because that's the only partner that's been put in front of them. But I suggest you kind of start poking around there and take a look at what your First Nations think about and how DRIPA can maybe fit into this. Because I think if we were to co-manage along with First Nations, we'd end up with a much better result than we do co-managing along with industry, which is what we've been doing. That's kind of what I got to say about it.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
Thanks for that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's good to hear the other side of the conversation, especially from somebody who's actually deeply involved in forestry.
Evelyn, Anthony has his hand up.
Where are you, Anthony? I don't see you. There you are. Go ahead, Anthony.
Mute. There we are. I'm unmuted, I think. Hope. Anyway, a couple of comments. One was about mentioned Mike Morris. I think that was a really rather good suggestion that you at least meet with him. I think he would be most interested in an overview of what's gone on in the boundary, because there are many parallels to what's gone on in his area in Prince George. Absolute devastation.
Yeah.
So that was a good suggestion. The other comment that pricked me was, well, it's related. Mike Morris, if I'm correct, the last time I read something by him, he mentioned that the level of exports of lumber from this province need to be reduced. And that is a major driver of how much we clear cut, the rate of clear cutting. And of course, the rate of clear cutting is related to the rate of job loss. I mean, this industry can't deny that. As clear cutting increases, so do jobs decrease. So I don't know how one goes about that, but of all that we produce, only 20% is needed to build our homes for Canada's own use. Building homes and all our use for wood. Only 20% of all that lumber that's cut. So I don't know how you go about that, but certainly a conversation with Mike Morris might be well worthwhile.
Yeah, thanks, Anthony. I had an introductory conversation with him. So yeah, more detailed convo would be good. I like that phrase. The more clear cutting goes up, the more jobs go down.
Well, the statistics prove it.
I have a question, Jennifer, that your first task was it to prepare with research, I think it was. Oh, here
Yeah.
it is, here.
Yeah, that's right.
Research and outreach, information kits, so forth. Will Boundary Forest be sharing that information to the larger community before it actually you get into your next stage, which is the activate and
you know, that's a good question. I hadn't thought of that. Before we hold the events, what were you thinking?
Okay, well, the reason I'm asking you this is because Anthony mentioned this thing about log exports. And I think it was Casey that brought it up in the meeting with our MLA. There are certain agreements that the provincial government has undertaken with non-Canadian entities where we're exporting these logs. And if we all of a sudden shut that stuff down, there may be compensation that needs to be paid, or there may be a new agreement that needs to be written. This is not an easy thing. You just don't turn off the tap. If you were to find something out about that, that would be pretty helpful to the larger community, because it would give us a sort of a better real framework and from which to make statements, right?
I need to just interject here. I was referring to lumber exports, not to raw log exports.
I'm sorry, Anthony, I misquoted you. I did hear you say lumber exports. I don't know anything about lumber exports, but I had heard this about the log exports. So this is something that may be relevant.
Yeah, so is it Eveline or Eveline?
Eveline.
Eveline, what you're suggesting is before we hit the road and hold the events, that we push out some information to everybody who is involved or who might be involved, so that there's some preparation on their parts as well. So information gathering is happening and information sharing is happening the whole way. So everybody's coming to the table informed.
Yeah. Yeah, it's important. I can't remember whether it was you or Michelle that said this, but there's so many of us, so many different organizations. It's really helpful to have a singular message that is based on fact and science, is really what it boils down to. Taryn, I see a hand.
Yeah, it's just on that point again. I would like both Michelle, Jennifer, and anyone else who wanted to weigh in on that fact of why are we sort of anticipating the worst case scenario from licensees. I really resent the fact that they think that we're going to reimburse them somehow for maybe timber that might grow in the future. And just because they've done improvements on their 10 years, which is a mill that they've shut down 40 years ago, you know, we need to save the province for forest and biodiversity and not really focus on even opening up the door an inch, a crack, you know, to pay back licensees or buy our own land back. And I really am outraged when First Nations have to buy back their own land on the coast, you know, to take it back from Weyerhaeuser or West Fraser or Teal Jones. It's you know, so I'd like a unified message on this. You know, stop me if I'm wrong, but I think I don't want to go there and even open the door to that.
I'd rather hear what Michelle's take on that than comment myself.
So you're wondering Taryn, about just how I think about the idea of compensating licensees
Yeah.
for IPCAs. Yeah, I mean, I think someone asked a question about where the money should be going. I think inevitably some of the money will be probably going to compensating licensees for nations that protect their land. Unfortunately, it's unfortunate that they have to do that, of course, but I mean, I think that we probably need to reconfigure the tenure system in order to address a lot of these issues. Of course, Herb Hammond's been talking about this for ages. And yeah, I think that's like probably a really big thing to do. It's a morass, but yeah, it is pretty ridiculous that communities have to pay companies to have their own land back. But then again, you know, I guess the question is, where would that money be going? If it's supporting workers who are laid off, I think that's maybe a reasonable destination for those funds, but maybe not, you know, bigwig corporation type guys as much.
Casey, did you have a comment or a question?
Yes, I had three. I don't know that we'll get to them all, but so the compensation was, I was more concerned about international or national trade agreements, right? So that's a different story with the tenure holders. So basically, Evelyn, you just mentioned that the FPB is doing an audit on Tolko, and I have some friends. I just came back from there. They had their sort logs out in the wilderness in many different areas, and now there's sort yard. They have to cut the trees, truck them down to their yard now to sort them, and I can't divulge my sources, but there apparently may have been some issues with their self-scaling and the Tolko's measurement and you know, applying for compensation, the stumpage and whatnot. So they are now scaling all their logs in one location as opposed to many. And so breach of contract for the tenure holders. I mean, like their Interfor's logging white bark pine, so they're in breach of contract there. You know, there's how many logging companies have been found, at least to some degree, guilty of landslides, you know, they're in breach of contract, you know, the scaling issues in breach of contract. So that I think a lot of those tenure holders, if the government had the fortitude and the political will, could get out of their responsibilities, or at least a lot of the financial responsibilities they would have to the tenure holders, by enforcing or enacting breach of contract on many of these guys. So that's the first one. The international trade agreements, though, and the national trade agreements is one that I'm very interested in to see what exists that may be holding the government back. Just two other points that in general, and Jennifer, thank you very much. And the First Nations, of course, nothing would ever or should ever happen with any of this without the full engagement of the First Nations. But I will point out that they're no different than some of us colonial folks, where they all have their, in most cases, colonial governments, and the hereditary, the desire of the hereditary minded people are not so always supported by the politically elected individuals. So they are not necessarily the First Nation folks have to be involved. And I can only hope that they will actually be able to bring their traditional practices and knowledge to the table, instead of having some of these their political leaders who are in the pockets. I mean, there's a lot of money involved, right? A lot of First Nations have businesses now, and they're run through the colonial banking system. So there's, you know, they got the white folk bankers, and I mean, it's all just, we're all people. There's greed on all sides. That's not a race specific thing. So First Nations, yes, I hope that all works out. And there was one other thing, but I'm carrying on, so I'm just gonna let it go. Thank you.
I think we should all let it go. It's 5 to 9. We're going to be cut off here very quickly. There is some very interesting comments in the chat. The chat is a wonderful source of information. I really encourage people to have a look at that once that gets copied out and posted. The question to the $1 billion fund is in there. The answer to my question about that. Everyone, thank you so much, Michelle and Jennifer, for taking the time tonight to make these amazing presentations. I would encourage everybody to find their websites and go online. And if you can support them, what they're doing, I find it really interesting, the different tangents that are going on. We all have our little projects, and it's great to hear what other people are doing. I also really appreciated listening to a forester speak and someone talking about the legislation side of things. So some things to look at there. I think we should call it a night. Thank you all very, very much.
Thank you,
And,
Elaine.
Thank you, everyone.
Yes, thank you for sharing.
all right.
If you want a copy of the recording, I did put the email in the chat box.
All right. Thank
Yeah,
you.
thanks you guys for hosting.
Thank
Thank you, Jennifer and Michelle. That was fantastic. Motivating. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Good night. Good
Good
night.
night.
Stop the recording.
Clarice,
Yes,
I made a copy of the chat box.
so did I, but go ahead.
Okay, you got it all good.
It says a
we-
recording went to the cloud, so I wasn't expecting that, but anyway,
Yeah.
anyway, here we are.